Hello, and welcome to Leadership PRN. This is the Dalhousie Faculty of Medicine's podcast for leaders, both established and emerging. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton. I'm a psychiatrist in my clinical practice and one of the directors of faculty development for the Faculty of Medicine. So today I'm really excited to have a guest who I have a lot of respect for. He's somebody that is a well-known figure in Dalhousie medicine, and I'm pleased to call him a friend as well, Dr. Jock Murray. Hi, Jock.
Good morning, Lara.
It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Our listeners wouldn't necessarily know this, but among your many interests is that you love to read, and you and I were actually in a book club for a number of years, and it was a great experience to hear your thoughts and to learn from the other members. I really valued that experience.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book club with some really interesting people.
So, Jock, like I said, you're probably well known to a lot of people listening to this podcast, but can you tell us a bit about yourself and some of your past roles with the Faculty of Medicine?
Yeah, well, actually, my connection with the medical school goes back over 60 years. And I came to Dal as a medical student in 1958. At that time, I was in the Navy, and I met Janet, and I was just entering medical school at the time, but we were married in the second year. And by the time I finished my internship, we had 2 children. So our first experience was to go into family practice in a small community for a number of years. I wanted to do postgraduate work, and so returned to Halifax. Then with our 4 young children under 6, we went off to London, England. Then we went to Toronto. And then I came back on faculty at Dal in 1969. And I've been really well supported and enjoyed my whole career at Dal. I was first chief of medicine at Camp Hill. Then I was head of neurology. Then I was the dean of medicine. Then head of medical humanities. But through all of that, my major interest and daily involvement was taking care of MS patients. And so that was something that I did from the start of my neurology career till I retired from practice when I was 72. And that was a very happy experience. I really enjoyed my MS patients.
We had Dr. Michael Fleming on the podcast a while ago. He was talking about his experiences of balancing work as a clinician with also academic work. How would you say you managed to maintain that balance between continuing to care for patients while also taking on these really significant leadership roles?
Yeah, I was pleased that early in my career, probably with the advice of Janet, to define what we were really about. And what we decided is that a really important thing we had to balance was the family. And so even though we took sabbaticals and whatever, we always took our kids. We took our kids everywhere we went. And we planned things around our family. So that was really important in defining how I was first going to balance my life. The second thing from an academic point of view was to define what I was. And I did that quite early and said that what I do, and actually probably the only thing I'm really good at, was I take care of patients and I teach students. And so after that, there were jobs that came along and people asked me to do things. But I would only do them if I could continue to take care of patients and teach students. And that really kept a strong base throughout my career. I got involved with a lot of international organizations. For 2 years, I had an office in Philadelphia. But I managed all that as long as I could take care of my patients and teach my students. And I mean, Janet was very tolerant, but also very supportive during all that. And my kids were involved in most of my projects as well. So you can balance it. It takes a lot of effort and time, but get your priorities right. And we set our priorities right very early, and I think that was very important. I was offered jobs that I didn't think I was capable of doing, so I didn't take them.
That's interesting. So there were jobs you were offered that you didn't take because you thought they would impinge on these other things. Is that right?
Yeah. And particularly when I finished as dean, I I had a lot of requests to do other jobs, but those had big titles and important duties and whatever, but they wouldn't allow me to continue to see patients and teach students, so I didn't do them.
Hmm. Why were those two things so important to you?
The things that I think I'm good at and I thought I got most reward from doing. See, I'm not a great academician. I'm not a great researcher. I mean, I published a huge number of papers and whatever, but that's not really what I'm about. What I thought I could do best was caring for MS patients. Even, for the first decades that I was caring for MS patients, I had no therapy that would make any difference in their outcome. But I still found it rewarding to be able to go down that long road that they had by supporting them, educating them, talking to them, being there when they needed me. That's something that I think a physician basically does, and I thought I could do that well. As a teacher, I actually like to teach the most junior students. The more senior ones knew more than I did, so I was always happy to teach the earlier students.
Hmm. It sounds like it's about knowing who you are.
Yes, yeah, and knowing what you can do and what you can't do. And most things just require someone to think about them and do them. I mean, I think it was Woody Allen who said that 80% of success is turning up. And a lot of people don't turn up. They don't think they're smart enough, or other people could do them better, or they don't have the background. Most of the time, most things just require someone who's committed to do them. And I just took on things I thought I could do.
Do you have particular accomplishments that you're most proud of when you think about your career?
Well, there are a few things. I'm very proud of my involvement with people with MS. We had one of the earliest multidisciplinary MS clinics in the country. I then organized in Canada and also in the US 2 different organizations to bring together multidisciplinary clinics. We started our first meeting with 6 people. An annual meeting now is 3,000 people. And it has an interesting concept. It wasn't just neurologists talking to neurologists. It was everybody who cares for an MS patient. So they're nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, social workers, speech therapists, and we share the teaching and the papers and even the presidency of these organizations. And so the secret was to just decide who cares for an MS patient. In fact, most of the care comes from other than the neurologist. So it's an interesting concept for, I think, a group of patients like MS patients. Now there are a lot of new therapies, and they're doing so well that I'm really pleased. But I was really proud to be involved in the beginning of that kind of phenomenon. I'm also pleased that I was able to bring some attention to the fact that the medical humanities are an integral part of medical education. I mean, it was always there, it just didn't get much attention.
That's certainly one of the things that I would associate with your career at Dalhousie would be establishing the medical humanities program. Do you want to talk a little bit about the medical humanities and how you brought that to Dalhousie?
Yeah, well, the first thing I realized is that it's very difficult to start something new because you need resources and people and salaries and whatever. But the first thing I realized is that if you look around in the university or in the medical school, you'll find people who have not only interest, but great talent in areas of the humanities. So you can find someone who is a good writer, and you can find someone who's a historian, and someone who's a philosopher. And you can find that these people are all there. All you have to do is bring them together and say that we're all part of something. And so we started really with no resources. And the only thing is that these people were all very committed to it. Also noticed early that in the wider university, people really like being involved with the medical school. So if you were in the Department of English or in philosophy or history or whatever, they really liked being involved with the concept of expanding their area into the area of medicine. And so it was just a matter of being a little creative. It was interesting initially because the students picked up on it very quickly. I mean, the students had no difficulty with that. The public really liked the idea. They liked the idea that doctors were more involved in the humanistic aspect of medicine. The ones you had to drag along were often faculty because they thought that was interesting, but it was sort of peripheral. And the effort was really to say, no, this is integral to the concept of medical education. There's a historical aspect to almost everything we do. And there's a philosophical and ethical aspect to everything we do. So it's not difficult to apply any of the humanities to medicine, whether it's music or literature or history. And there are lots of talented people around who love to talk about it and do things.
For you personally, what aspects of the medical humanities are the ones that drew you the most or that interested you the most?
I think initially, if I look back, I actually started out to be a medical artist. And I got more interested in the medical aspect and realized that I didn't have that much originality as an artist. But I still retained the interest in art. The next thing was literature, and that was because I was in a big rush in my early schooling. So I didn't graduate from high school. I didn't graduate from university because I always skipped years. And so I went to university from grade 11. I went to medical school, not having finished undergraduate. My parents, I don't think, thought I would graduate from anything. And so the first thing I ever graduated from was medicine. But being in a hurry isn't a good idea because it meant in those days that you spent most of your time doing the pre-medical things, the sciences and whatever. And I realized early that I really wasn't as balanced or as knowledgeable about things that Janet was. I mean, Janet had a degree in philosophy and a degree in journalism. So I started really to make an effort to read. And a very formative thing to do was to put down a list of about 10 books that everybody knew about, but I hadn't read, and started there. And from that, I can tell you that about 4 or 5 of those lists I've written papers about. So it became very important to me. And so we ended up with a collection of 12,000 books in our house. So those things, and then history. History was important to me, and I've written a lot about historical aspects. So those were, I think, formative in my own personal involvement. And when we started the humanities program, if a student came and they wanted to do a project in philosophy, well, I'm not that knowledgeable of philosophy, but I know people who are. And so it was easy to put things together. So no, it was a great time, and I really enjoyed that involvement. And one of the nice things about retirement is those things you can continue to do. So I still give lectures about art and literature and history. I have 3 local talks coming up in the next few months. I'm giving 2 to Montreal in November. So those kinds of things. You can't really keep up with the technology of medicine after you retire, but you can keep up with your interest in the humanities.
Well, I was thinking about that. Like, a lot of your publications, I think, have been on the medical humanities, not necessarily evaluating a program, but aspects like history. I know you've written a lot about Osler, for example. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to write on all these and speak on these very diverse humanities topics?
Yeah. Well, I must confess that there are 2 aspects that I really love. I love doing the research. And I have a pattern in which if I'm going to do a paper on something, it may take me 5 years or even longer. Some of them take much longer. And I read and I accumulate around that subject. And so I like that background research. But there is a point in which you have to say, I got to finish this and write it. And so I would manage to complete that, and then I'd always be involved in something else. And one project always leads to another project, and so that's a continuing interest even now. I also like to link talking about the subject, because after 5 or 10 years working on something, you know quite a bit about it. And so it's kind of exciting to interest other people in the topic. Now, mind you, it has to be a topic that has that basic interest. I mean, there's some things that you might research forever and still not find anybody who wants to hear about it. But most of these were sort of intriguing kinds of interests. And some of them lasted a long time. And I've been writing about Dr. Samuel Johnson and his the people around him and the age of medicine in the life of Johnson for 45 years. And at one point, I was head of the Johnson Society in England. And so that's a continuing area of interest. And then the writing. I like to write. And I know you do too. And I write every day. I mean, I've been writing a diary since 1965. I write to friends, which is another aspect I think is important in retirement. You can reach out. As E.M. Forrester said, you only connect. And so in retirement, every month, on the first day of the month, I write a long letter to a group of friends in Canada, the US, and the UK that I've known over the years. And they write as well, because they're also people who like to write. And so we write 3 or 4 page letters to each other on the first of every month. And I've been doing that for 10 years. I also like to dabble in writing, and I know you do. I admired the time that I remember you took a weekend to write a novella.
You're right, I did.
And but I also like to dabble in writing short stories and even a novel, which I never planned to publish at all. But it's interesting to do it, to develop the plot, develop the characters, intriguing aspect, learn how to do dialogue properly. It's just a fun exercise. So a lot of my day is spent writing.
I think you're right. Writing can be an end in itself and a reward in itself, can't it? As a hobby,
Yeah,
even.
I just like to write.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said that you retired at age 72. Was that from both clinical practice and
Yeah.
academic work?
And although it was more about clinical practice, because a lot of what I do, I continued to do. I still taught, I still gave lectures, I still wrote, I still published. I published more per year after I retired than before. You have more time to do it. Probably the first decade after I retired, I published a lot of stuff. And so that continues, and I'm still doing that. I probably am not a good person to advise people on retirement, though, because I don't even keep my own advice.
Well, I was going to ask you that about, you've had a long career and very productive. And as you say, it's carried on into your retirement years. You're still speaking, you're still writing. Yeah. So what advice would you have for listeners who want a rewarding retirement?
Yeah, well, I'm still very busy, and I'm 86. But one thing about retirement is that you have to plan it early. You can't plan your retirement the day you retire. But most physicians know that. And most physicians I know think a lot and plan a lot about the retirement long before. So they're pretty successful at it. There's another reason I think that perhaps physicians don't need a lot of advice about retirement, is that they're lifelong learners. That's part of their being, it's part of their profession. And so they continue to learn, but they also learn about other things. So most physicians have other interests. And I only met one physician in my whole career that didn't seem to have anything. He had only the practice of medicine. And he was crushed by retirement because he didn't have any other way to express himself. But most physicians do. And actually, one of the things we found in the humanities program is the remarkable things that many physicians do. They don't talk about it. They don't tell people about it, but they have hobbies and they have skills and they have crafts that they do that are just quite remarkable. And so they continue those things. The other bit of advice that I think is important for most physicians is when you're coming up to retirement, do it slowly, right? Not as one day everything suddenly stops, but begin to slow down, take a little more time off, spend time on other things so that it's a more gradual rather than sudden change. But as I say, I'm not very good at keeping my own advice. I spend probably too much time every day on a screen. So my best advice to other people is don't pay any attention to my advice.
What do you think is the right age for physicians to retire?
It's probably changing. I mean, there was a time when, physicians tended to die with their boots on, that they just continued until they collapsed. And practice didn't actually change a lot. It's changing so rapidly now. So keeping up the knowledge that's required is much more difficult for people. So I think that you're going to find that physicians, and this is going to be part of the problem for the healthcare system, physicians are going to retire earlier. And because it's so much more difficult keeping up, and no one wants to hurt anyone. So physicians are very conscious of the fact that they have to be competent, they have to be good at what they do. And keeping up when you're 65 is harder. And the fields are changing so rapidly. So I think that's one of the things you're going to change. I'm going to go to a luncheon this week with retired physicians. And the thing that strikes me is that it's a much younger group than it used to be. And I think that that's part of it. Also, physicians work really hard. And keeping that up for a long time, particularly when you're in your 60s or so, it's harder to do. So plan early, do it gradually, and I think that's probably the best advice. Everybody's individual, so how they do their retirement is a very individual thing. But most physicians are successful at it.
When you look back, any final words, any thoughts that you would share with early career physicians or even residents or medical students about how to have a really productive career that you look back on at the end and you feel a degree of satisfaction?
Yeah, I think my feeling is that physicians early on should recognize that they're part of a community. So it means you have to contribute, not just working every day, because there is a push to make physicians just work all day, but to contribute, to go to that meeting, make that phone call, do something in your community, be involved with other things, take part in, as I mentioned earlier, Woody Allen's idea that success is 80% of success is turning up. Turn up, because you can do things as well as anyone else. So play your part. Also, it broadens your life. So you're not doing the same thing continually all day. You have that involvement with that group. You're in that committee. You're trying to accomplish this in medical education. That broadens your life, and it keeps things much more interesting.
Thanks so much for speaking with me today, Jock. It's really always a pleasure, and I feel like I don't get to catch up with you often enough. So it's been really great to talk with you and to see you.
You're doing all the things I just advise people to do.
Well, I think I've got a little while before I retire, but anyway, it is a thought on my mind as well. And I hope when I am retired that I can look back as you have and think of all the really great things that have happened over the course of a career.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Happy to be.
So that's another episode of Leadership PRN. If you have any topics you'd like to hear or any guests you'd like me to interview, feel free to reach out to me at lara.hazelton@dal.ca or lara.hazelton@nshealth.ca. Until next time, take care.